Today we'll be learning how to solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is another method for solving a quadratic equation, and in order to use the formula, we want to make sure that the equation is written in standard form. So remember, standard form is ax squared, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. The quadratic formula is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So all we're going to do is identify a, b, and c, plug it into that equation, and we're going to use our calculator. So as long as you can correctly type it into your calculator, this is going to be a very easy method for solving quadratic equations. And the nice thing about the quadratic formula is it works every time. So even if you have an equation that you can solve by factoring, you can still solve this with the quadratic formula. If you can solve by using square roots, you can still solve that by using the quadratic formula. There will be equations that you cannot solve by factoring or using the square root method, and in those equations you will have to use the quadratic formula. Okay, so let's follow these steps and do this example. Make sure the equation is set equal to 0. So we know that this is equal to 0, and it is written in standard form. Next, we're going to identify A, B, and C. So let's identify A, B, and C. A is 5. That's this one here. B is also 5. And C is negative 8. So remember, you must take the sign that's in front of that number. So now we know A, B, and C. So I'm going to show you how I set up the quadratic formula to make sure that I type it into the calculator exactly correctly and get the right answer. So we are going to substitute these values into the formula. So I'm going to rewrite this equation, and everywhere that I see a letter, I'm going to put a set of parentheses. Everywhere I see a letter, I'm going to put a set of parentheses. Everything else stays exactly the same. Okay, so I have a negative, and instead of B, I'm going to write parentheses. Remember what this symbol means, plus or minus. The square root of, there's a B there, so I'm going to make parentheses, squared minus 4. And then there's A and C, so 2 sets of parentheses. And in the denominator, 2 and a set of parentheses. So all I did was copy this formula, and instead of the letters, I'm going to put parentheses. Now I'm going to put the numbers in that represent A, B, and C where they're supposed to go in that formula. So B goes here and here. A is going to go in this one and this one, and C goes in this one. So now that I've set this up, I'm going to type this part into the calculator exactly the way it looks. The only difference is that I can only use plus or minus. So you have to do it twice. So this first time, I'm going to plug it in using the plus sign. So start, if you're using the TI-30s that we have in the classroom, you can press the fraction button. It says N over D. So set that up as a fraction, and you're going to start with negative parentheses 5 parentheses plus the square root. So remember, to get the square root symbol, you have to hit the green second button and the x squared button, and that'll bring up the square root symbol, parentheses 5 parentheses squared, so that's the x squared button, minus, now remember this is the black minus button, not the negative button, 4 parentheses 5 parentheses, another set of parentheses, negative 8 parentheses, and now use the arrows to go to the denominator, and then you'll do 2 parentheses 5 parentheses. Now I know that was a lot, but all you're doing is copying exactly what you wrote here. So as soon as you type that into your calculator, go ahead and press equals, and you're going to get a long decimal answer. It's an irrational number. We are going to round it to the nearest hundredth. Remember, the hundredth is the second place after the decimal. So we're going to round to the nearest hundredth. So in this case, we're going to write that x, and now when we're rounding, we need to use the squiggly lines instead of an equal sign because we're rounding. So we're going to say x equals 0.86. Now, you're going to type that entire thing in again, but instead of plus, we are going to use minus. So go ahead and type that whole thing into your calculator again, but we're going to use minus in front of the square root button. Make sure you're using the black minus button there. Okay, so when you put that in, you'll end up with, if we round to the nearest hundredth, x equals negative 1.86. So those are our solutions, negative 1.86 and 0.86, and we've solved that equation using the quadratic formula. Okay, let's do 2 more examples. Again, the only thing to this is being able to set it up correctly and type it into the calculator correctly. So x equals, and I'm going to write out again the formula, but I'm going to use parentheses instead of letters. So negative parentheses plus or minus the square root parentheses squared minus 4, 2 sets of parentheses, and 2 parentheses. Now we have a is equal to 5, b is equal to negative 6, and c is negative 5. So take those numbers and plug them into the formula. Negative 6, negative 6, 5, and 5 goes there, and negative 5 goes here. So you're going to type this into the calculator 2 different times. The first time using plus, and the second time using minus. So pause the video here, go ahead and put those into your calculator, and you're going to round your answers to the nearest hundredth. Okay, so you should have gotten in your calculator that x is equal to 1.77 and x is equal to negative 0.57. Now, I just want to show you that if we looked at this in the beginning and said, oh, I can factor that. I can create my x puzzle, right? So a times c goes at the top. That would make this negative 30. And 5, nope, sorry, negative 6 is b. So that would go at the bottom. You can try, oh my gosh, I don't know why I put negative 30 there. It should be negative 25. 5 times negative 5. Okay, sorry. 5 times negative 5 is negative 25. That's your top number, and the bottom number is negative 6. Now, we try to solve this x puzzle. Well, the factors for 25 would be 1 and 25, or 5 and 5. And there's no way I can make any of these negative, and any of them would add up to negative 6. So this cannot be solved using factoring. We can't do it. So that is when you will need the quadratic formula, when you cannot solve by factoring. Okay, last example is number 2. Now this quadratic formula or quadratic equation does not have a bx term. No bx term. So what do? We know that 3 is a, and negative 8 is actually c, because c is the constant. If there's no bx term, then b is actually 0. So if you don't see the number there, you're going to make that 0. Now we set up our formula here. The opposite plus or minus okay, so now plug in the values for a, b, and c. B is 0, 0, 3 and 3, and negative 8. Okay, so pause the video here while you plug all of that into your calculator twice. The first time using plus, and the second time using minus. Okay, so the two answers you should have gotten are positive 1.63 and negative 1.63. All right, so that's what you'll be practicing today in your homework.